Hello, 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 Savvy Moms. This is Elkie of Savvy Moms Unite, where I teach moms how to live a simple, practical, realistic life. Welcome to week 2 of our Savvy Mom Get Your Money Life Bootcamp. Now, last week, our class focused on your spending habits. So I've been sending reminders in the group, hoping that you're tracking your spending and you're doing your best to know what you're spending your money on and why you're spending your money on certain items. So this was just a assessment week to see how you spend and also to start the tracking process. You will continue to track throughout the course because it really is helpful to continue to track even beyond this because it'll be such a great tool for you to use to help you as you're creating your budget for the next month. So, I hope that's been going well, and I hope you found it insightful. And if there's any like aha moments, be sure to share it in the group, the Savvy Moms Unite group, where you've been getting this information. Now you'll notice that this course, this session is pre-recorded, and it's because I want to make sure that you have access to it on the day of the class. We're not doing the live session this Sunday, but the following week we will do another live class. Now, this topic that I'm going to focus on this week is on debt. Now, debt is not something a lot of people like talking about, right? We're always a little like, debt seems hard to talk about. It's not the thing we are proud of. With most of the time we're ashamed of it, and sometimes we don't even know how much debt we have. We know we have debt, but we don't know the amount. We can't give the dollar amount. We can't give a sense of why or how we've gotten this debt. We just know we have debt. Now, what I will say is there are some, positive impacts that debt has, and there's definitely some negative impact, and I'll explain the two. So whenever you accrue, like whenever you sign off on documents, whether that's a mortgage, the sale of a car, that student loans, you are taking on what is called a debt if you have not paid for these items outright with cash. You are saying that you're willing to finance this amount in order to pay it back in monthly installments. That is considered a debt. Now, in some cases, those debts could be considered a positive impact. And the reason I'm saying positive is because if you decide to take on any of these debts and you pay them monthly consistently, you will build a positive credit history. And a positive credit history comes from that on-time monthly payments. It comes from your debt to income ratio, which I'll explain a little bit about. And it comes from your, ability to show how risky you are to the banks to lend you money. So the debt to income ratio, well, that just is determined by what you bring into your household versus how much you have in debt. Now, if your debt to income ratio is really high, meaning your debt is higher than what you bring in, well, then your creditors will have to do some digging to see if you can really pay back the loan that you might have applied for. So you may notice if you have a large amount of debt that you've defaulted on, or you are paying the minimum on, but you're not paying a significant amount. You're sort of maxed out on your credit cards. You'll notice if you do go and apply to another credit card or loan, you'll get denied because your bank would have said, okay, based on your income, based on what you pay in various household expenses, you cannot afford to pay us back, so you're considered high risk. We're not going to give you the loan. But if you continue to pay consistently, pay history accounts for a certain amount of your credit score, as well as the amounts you have in debts, and as well as the longevity of this debt. So a lot of people, especially if they're older and have student loans, once they've been paying those student loans consistently for however many years, 10, 15 years, that's a good history. So sometimes it goes to your disadvantage if you pay off that debt sooner than 10 years. Because what creditors like to see is a long history of credit so they can assess if you're someone willing, if you're someone they're willing to take that risk on, right? So that could be the positive impact of debt. And of course, with homes and mortgages, there is the opportunity to build equity that does take time, but there's that opportunity to build some equity, meaning the value of the house can go up, which you can build into an equity account, which sometimes you can use to borrow against the house if you'd like. But that, like I said, takes time. That can't happen, after 2 years of ownership. But if you're consistently paying your mortgage, that most certainly will help your score. All right. And if you own property that you rent and that rent's being paid consistently, that's another positive debt. Now, when debt can negatively impact you, I kind of alluded to that a little bit with the whole debt to income ratio. You do not want to owe more than what you can afford to pay back. Okay, understand this. If you're someone making $30,000 and you're $100,000 in debt, you're considered high risk. The chances of you paying that debt back in the time frame that it's expected of you is highly unlikely. So, what I always say to people is, if you're going to go and take on a debt, make sure it's something you can most certainly pay back and pay back in a good span of time. Now, the debts that you probably want to maintain on your credit, of course, is the ones, like I said, student loans and maybe a mortgage, because you want to show longevity. But you definitely don't want to have a credit card that you've maxed out and only paying the minimum on, and you still owe $10,000 after 3 years. You want to make sure that you are taking on debt you can afford. When debt negatively impacts you is when you're late on payments. Creditors usually gives you about a grace period of 7 days in some cases, not all the time. Sometimes it's as short as 3 days. So it all depends on your credit card company and who your creditor is. So you make sure you know what the grace period is. But you have 25 days to make a payment. And within those 25 days, it's the reporting time. So you always need to make sure that you're on time. If that bill is due on the 1st, pay the bill before or on the 1st. Do not be late on your payments. I always pay my bills days ahead or on the due date. I never go above my due date because sometimes creditors don't even want to wait a day. They'll charge you a late fee. So just make sure that you're on time. That bill's good. That will negatively impact you if you do not pay on time. Another thing that can negatively impact you is having any repossessions on your debt. If you went and signed for a car that you were financing, meaning you had a bank give you the money to pay for the car and you were required to pay monthly on this account or on this loan, and you haven't paid in a few months, some dealers can repo the car. They can repossess the car, take it back in their possession. You don't own that car. The title belongs to the dealer or the bank that gave you the money. Now, if you have had that happen, that will negatively impact your credit because it shows poor credit history. Another way you can negatively impact your credit is having too many open accounts. Creditors do not like to see that you are constantly taking on credit that you can't afford. So I always say, and this is my rule of thumb, have one open credit account that you use regularly and pay regularly. That will help boost your score. That will help boost your credit history. That will show you good practice. I don't believe in having 6 credit cards. I don't think it's worth it to you because that is hard to manage. Unless you're a business who has to have a separate business card, separate checking account, and all that stuff, then yes, that might make sense to have multiple cards. But as a one person or a family, I always say maintain one credit card that you use ever so often, but always make sure you pay back or pay more than the minimum payment due per month. Um, the other thing is you should know what the what the credit or debt entails. Read all the paperwork. You should not be signing for anything unless you know what it entails. Now, a lot of times, especially if we apply for store cards, we'll walk into the store. The first thing they want to tell us is, oh, sign up for a card today and you can have 20% off today if you sign up for a card today, right? They'll tell you that. And of course, that's enticing because who doesn't want to save money, especially if it's 20%? That's a good number, good savings. And you get sucked into that deal on the spot. But long term, if you take on that card, sometimes the APR is 24% to sometimes, in some cases, high 28%. If that's the case, when you think about what you pay for that item over time, it's not worth the 20% you saved in that moment. You actually end up paying more, which then that creditor gets more of a benefit. You don't benefit. So with store cards, if you're someone who's had poor credit history and you need a store card to build your positive credit history, I'd say yes, go ahead and get a store card, but know that you have to pay it off every month that you use it. Do not carry a balance. If you are to carry a balance, it needs to be 30% or lower utilization rate. Meaning, if your limit is $300, let's say, and you spent $30, that's 10%, right, of its utilization. But let's say you spent $60, then you're at the 30%. You don't want to spend more than that, right? All right. So I always tell people, like, go make sure you, or let's say your credit limit is $1,000 and you spent about, 30. Well, you're at your 30%, right? So you always want to make sure you stay either below or at 30% credit utilization. Do not go over because you will surely regret it. It does negatively impact your score if you are spending close or at your limit. Um, Make sure that you're always on top of your credit and your debt. Each year, by law, you are allowed, I should say, to receive a free credit report through annualcreditreport.com. You can receive a credit report. You could get it from the 3 credit reporting bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, um, and they can then tell you what your credit report says. Now, they all report differently. Some will have the most updated in some cases, some may not. So just check it to make sure all information is accurate. That means your name is spelled correctly, your address is listed properly, your all the accounts that are currently open are open. Sometimes the credit, depending on the credit reporting company, they may have an account that says it's open but it's closed on another report. Just make sure they match, especially if you close those accounts. And I'll talk about why it might not make sense to close some accounts. But you need to see your credit report at least every year. I try to see my report twice a year, and I actually get to see my report even more often because I have credit. I have Capital One, and Capital One has a reporting system called Credit Wise, and that alerts me of any new accounts that have been opened, so that helps with credit fraud, and it also lets me know of my current score, and as well as any other information I need to know about my credit. It'll alert me to that. So I like having that for that reason. And that's no additional cost to me. That's free with me having the card and maintaining it in good standing. Um, Now, if in fact you decide to um, so um, you always want to make sure you're fully aware of what you owe. It sound it may sound scary. You may be looking at the situation like, why do I need to research this? Why do I need to know? Because if you go and apply for anything through a bank that's looking for you to give them information, you don't want to keep applying to cards or loans or anything and getting denied. Each time you get denied, that negatively impacts your score. So you always want to make sure you're going into any banking situation once you're requesting money that you're fully aware of your chances. Sometimes people get shocked and surprised. Yes, they do. Some people will get approved in situations I would have never thought possible, or you might not have thought was possible for you. But that does not mean it is totally impossible. I've seen situations where I might have been turned down for a $200 credit card, but been approved for a $4,000 one. And my credit score didn't change. So it really all depends. Now, having too many, closing your account. I lost my train of thought. So closing your account before a certain time can also negatively impact you. So at one point I had 10 credit cards, and for me that was very overwhelming. It was very tempting. I'm a shopaholic. It's a real thing. I have issues with spending at times, and so it wasn't until I had to be reeled in to the point where I started to understand how my spending was becoming a real issue for me. So I tend to spend in areas where there's flexibility. So clothing is a big one for me. Groceries is another one, as well as eating out. So I knew those were my trigger areas, and I had a lot of retail accounts. So at one point, I had about 8 retail accounts, credit cards, and this was over years. I get one, pay it off, keep it, use it 5 months later, pay the minimum. Like I was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I had like 4 clothing store cards, one electronic card. I opened a credit card to purchase my bed. I was just so open to opening credit accounts until I started to realize when I was paying these cards, and if I wasn't paying off monthly what I charged, I ended up paying a lot more in interest because the longer you have the carrying of the debt, the more interest they're going to take. So if the APR is 24% and that item costs you $50, well, if you don't pay that off, you then will owe way more after you've paid the minimum for 6 months. So because I was really nervous, I go back to using a good chunk of these cards. I decided to close 4 accounts out of the 10 I had. And I was left with 5 because I was still paying them off. So I paid off the 4. I had 5 still open, and I was really nervous and said, okay, I got to close them. Well, I thought I was doing the right thing. This was prior to me doing research and understanding why that was a bad idea. And I wish I had, done my research, but this is why I want to save you the trouble. When I went ahead and closed those accounts, it made my score go down. And the reason is that those accounts, when closed, are no longer reporting a positive history because they were paid off. So I was better off, even though I paid it off, having that account still reflected on my credit report as open versus closing them, even though they were at a zero balance. It's still good to have it remain open than to just shut it off, just to close it because I was afraid to use it. Now, what you can do if you're like me, who you have to manage your spending, I would say put your credit cards in a freezer or even cut them up. Um, because keeping the accounts open at zero balance isn't a bad thing. And you will build a longer credit history showing that you've had the card. Now, sometimes credit card companies will do this. If they see you're not using the card, they will decrease your limit, which can harm you if you go to use it and now you're closer to your max than you were before, right? So let's say you had a $500 limit. You haven't used the card in over 6 months. Your creditor starts looking at it and going, well, it's clear this person doesn't need it. So then they reduce you to 200. Well, let's say we're back at the 500. If you went and bought something from $150, not not much utilization at that point, right? But let's say you're now at the 200 and you go charge something for 150. Well, you're at pretty much almost to your max. You're $50 away from your max. That's a significant difference. So sometimes, I don't suggest doing this all the time, but sometimes what you can do is just charge something 1 month, pay, and then pay it off right away a few days later, and don't carry a balance just to show that you're still using the card. But I would say if you don't need to use it, it's not a useful card anymore, you can pay for cash for something, go right ahead. I'm a believer in if you don't have the cash right now, then don't go forward spending the money. If you're still relying on credit cards to make simple purchases and you can't pay that off, the next few days or the next week, then don't use your credit card. Some people will use the credit card to build gas points. So sometimes your credit card company will say, well, if you charge this much in gas, we'll give you rewards. Capital One does that. So I do get a reward cash for every time I shop at certain stores and whenever I fill up at the pump using the card. So I've done that to build points, and then I'll pay it off like the next day or a few days afterwards. And pay off whatever amount I charge, just so that I'm not increasing my my credit utilization rate. Um, so yeah, keeping those accounts on your history. If you've paid them off, cut up the cards, freeze them, whatever you need to do. If you don't plan to use those cards ever again, I say cut them up. You don't need them. But if you do want to do the trick I said, where you like every now and then use it just to show, you're doing well with that, then I say put them in the freezer and pull them out only when you want to do that. You really only need one credit card. You don't need all these retail cards. They're a lot of work, and they're a lot of hassle. It can negatively impact you if you're not safe with that. So I wouldn't even suggest getting many if you don't need it. Only in a situation where you're trying to build credit, because actually having no credit, I don't know if anyone has told you this, but even having no credit is just as bad as having too many credit cards with balances maxed out. It's just as bad because the bank doesn't know how to treat you. They have nothing to base their decision on. So they're going to kind of look at it like, well, you're like having a $500 score, which is crazy, but it is. And banks make decisions on various, things and aspects of your financial history. So not all the time is it clear, cut, and dry. And just making sure that you don't default on payments on anything. Payment history is good for you. You got to make sure you stay on top of that. making sure you stay informed about your debt, how much you owe. Don't be afraid to assess your debt, and don't be afraid to pay it back. What I suggest you really consider is putting a plan in place to pay back your debts. And this is where I'm going to get into the second piece of the worksheet that you will use for this class. So the Savvy Mom budget worksheet has a sheet that's named debt assessment. What your assignment is going to be for this week, along with your tracking, because this is going to be a compounded assignment, you're going to write down all the creditors that you owe. And I'm talking credit cards, I'm talking personal loans, I'm talking student loans, car loans, whatever you owe that you haven't paid off at all, that is negatively impacting your history. I want you to write that down on the sheet, along with how much you owe, what is the minimum payment per month, when is the due date, and when do you plan to pay it off. So giving yourself some understanding, like, I have this amount of money going towards this. What would be a feasible time for me to consider paying this off? That's what you're going to work on. So get all your credit card bills, even medical bills, any loan agreements you sign, and paperwork, bills. Get those together and start writing down and doing that debt assessment, and kind of see how much you owe. You need to do that so you know how much. I know exactly how much I owe in debt to the dollar. And the reason I know that is because I assess it all the time. Every month I go through my, debt assessment to make sure I'm on track to pay it off in the time frame that I've designated. And it's part of my goal setting. It's part of my goal attainment. I have to be aware. So making sure that you're on top of that is crucial to the success of your financial journey and this course. If you have any questions about what I talked about on this video and also your budget worksheet, please do not hesitate to post your questions in the group. This is a friendly group. This is a learning group. We're not here to judge people. We're not here to make anyone feel bad for any of the choices they made regarding their finances. I'm not one to talk. I was in your shoes. I still am learning. So I'm never going to make you feel bad about where you are in your journey. This is a journey for all of us to go through. We have to go through this to learn to be better at our money. Okay? So I'm so excited for next week's lesson, and it'll be finally to the point where we'll look at creating your budget and what that entails and what you need to consider. This is all about mindset, getting your mind right around money. And once you work that piece out, everything else will come together. It really should be no more difficult now than it used to be. You really will see a difference in your approach once you start to get these tools down. So don't forget to continue to fill out your worksheet. Make sure you're tracking your spending, as well as taking note of your debt analysis. I'll do a check-in throughout the week just to make sure you stay on target with that, as well as your tracking. And if there's, like I said, if there's any questions, do not hesitate to ask. There's always an answer. And if I don't have it, I'm going to find it for you. Okay? Thanks again for being part of the class today. I'm so excited for next week, and I'm so excited for your progress. I love hearing about them, so please let me know. And we'll see you next Sunday. Take care.